subscribes to the LA Progressive gets into this kind of event for free. So you'll be getting an email message, and if you'd like to do that, we'd love to have you do it.
So without any further ado, Dr. RickWolff2.
So can you all hear me all right? Yes. If as we go along, you can, say something so that I can adjust to make sure you all hear it. I'm going to take the risk of starting in a way that I've started in the past, but only because saying it is even more urgent now than it has been in the past. I've often started talks by reminding you that the conditions and situations of our economic system that I'm about to take you through are not something for which I am responsible. That is, I am just the messenger, and as some of you know, it is impolite to shoot the messenger just because you don't like the message. Okay? Good. Yes, if I had a piano, I'd play it. But, you know, to try to move back and forth between the serious and the humorous, if only to use the humorous to get us through the serious, I do have to tell you that the capitalist system, which as little as 5 or 6 years ago, I had to be very careful about pointing out that it had some flaws. I don't have that problem anymore. My audiences, which are of all kinds, all over the United States, are now no longer need an explanation that the system doesn't work for them. They have more to tell me about that than I do to tell them, which is a wonderful situation for me to be in. I've never been in that position before in my life in this country, so it is remarkable. And I want you all to know, even before I go into my discussion of the economy, that a question I suspect is in many of your minds I can now answer. The interest, the enthusiasm of the American people for fundamental economic change has never been greater than it is right now. And that is becoming more true literally every day. And it means that there's a responsibility all of you have that you may not have thought about before, which is now is the time to talk to your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, your co-workers, because the window for real change is open in a way that it has not been for a long time, and who knows how long this open window will remain open. But at this point, if people like you and I are not taking advantage of that, then the slowness of a movement to develop will be our fault, and not so easily blamed on all the forces that don't want this to happen, and of course they're there. But things have changed just extraordinarily. 2 weeks ago, I give you an example. 2 weeks ago, I did an interview with Chris Hedges. He has a television program, some of you may know, called On Contact. He and I did an interview together about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. And he called me all excited. We just crossed 250,000 views for that program alone, half-hour program. He's never seen it before. RT, the company that runs it, had never seen it before. And it's happening over and over again. The last time I was here, which wasn't that long ago, and spoke with you, I've even made it to be on Fox News. Several times, I don't know if some of you may have seen it, several times. It's with Stuart Varney, a business reporter, has a program there every day. And talking to a person who he identifies, because he wants to, as a Marxist, has become relatively more normal. I always do the appropriate thing. I bow my head so you can see that I don't have horns. And so it becomes possible in the United States to have a conversation between a person who isn't and a person who is a Marxist, and the earth doesn't stop. The world goes on, and he calls me back. I've been on that program 3 times. And I'm going to be on it again. Even the Fox people kind of recognize that things are changing. So it would be tragic if people who are actually sympathetic with the way things are changing don't believe what virtually everybody else does. That would put us out of sync with one another in a way that isn't so good. All right, so let's get serious. The problem we live in, and if it scares you a little bit, that's good. It should. The problem we live in is that this system is not only not working real well for the majority of people, it's breaking down. I haven't believed that for a long time, probably ever in my life, until a few years ago, and now it's growing in such a sense that I have to begin my talks the way I'm doing it right now. I don't know how long this system will continue. It cannot continue the way it is going now, and it has no solution. This is a very serious problem. It's not so bad if you have a serious crisis. If at least you have a plan or some idea how you're going to get out of it. Not that it has to work, but at least you can sort of set your mind and you can now try to get out of it. This is a society whose people are increasingly committed to the notion it's a fundamental crisis and haven't a clue what to do or how to get out of it, which makes the crisis worse because of the tension and the anxiety because you don't know where to go. Every economic system in the history of the world has been born, has evolved over time, and has died. Slavery did that, feudalism did that, ancient tribal economies did it, you name it, they did it. There's no reason to assume that capitalism will not have the same history as every other system. It's true that every system had the ideologues in it who believed it would last forever. My profession of economics, 95% of my fellow economists believe that capitalism is the ultimate achievement of human rationality and will last forever. I'm glad you're laughing, because if you were in a seminar with economists, nobody would be laughing. They actually say this to one another. The language of economics is full of words like optimum and efficient and rational. These are none too subtle ways of saying what we have is the best there is. You can't get better than this. That's another sign the system is falling apart. That kind of confidence only comes from people who are dumb. Who don't understand even the history of their own system, let alone the history of all the other systems. The burden is not on me to claim that capitalism has a finite end. The burden is on anyone who believes it doesn't. It's right up there with believing you don't have a finite end, which I know is very tempting. The history of religion proves that. But you do know that whatever you think happens after you die, dying is on the agenda. And that's not just true for you and me, it's true for economic systems, and always has been. Which means then you have to ask the question, well, where are we in capitalism's history? Are we at the beginning? Are we at the middle? Or ... And for the first time, I want to have you ask and consider with me that we're at the ... stage. And that has heavy implications for everyone in this room, personally, as well as your role as a citizen, as a member of the community. Okay, let's get into it. The problems of our economic system have not been and cannot be resolved by piecemeal reforms. And the reason is simple. We've been there and we've done that. Let's go through just a few. And I'm an economist, so bear with me. I do this from that perspective. Capitalism as a system has been unstable. That's a polite way of saying it is a system that is peculiarly governed by an unstable oscillation. When we teach it in economics, we actually draw curves up and down, lines of oscillation. You know words like boom and bust and recession and depression and inflation and upturn and downturn. You know why we have so many words? Because this is a part of our lives in capitalism. If you actually look at every single country to which capitalism has come and settled in as their economic system, you will discover, as we have in the economics profession, that economic downturns happen on average every 4 to 7 years. Everywhere. Capitalism's history, roughly 300 years old, quarrel over it, but roughly, shows this. This is a pretty steady pattern. Now this has occasioned enormous upset, and you can readily see why. Every 4 to 7 years, millions of people are thrown out of work. It's not that we don't need their work, it's not that there was anything wrong with their work. It's just we live in a system that doesn't know how to deal with that, so they're out of work, which disrupts them, disrupts their spouses, disrupts their families, disrupts their communities, interrupts education, prevents people from getting married or having children. I mean, the most important decisions in life are shaken up. No business can function because it doesn't know over a planning period of 4 to 7 years what conditions it'll face. It may be genius at producing something, but if the market collapses, notice the language, if demand disappears, if the economy goes down, all your hard work in building up that business will avail you nothing. Periodically, these downturns are big and massive. You know that. 1929, the biggest we've ever had, and 2008, not so long ago, the second biggest we ever had. Now, notice, everything imaginable has been done to fix this problem, to prevent the downturns, to make them less serious, to make them less long. They don't work. We haven't been able to solve this problem. We've been working at it for 300 years. We even developed a whole new economics in our profession, named after the smartest guy who ever tried to solve it, a British economist named John Maynard Keynes. Came up with a whole set of analyses and policies that would try to deal with it. He was very excited, did a good job, was the leading economist in Britain for a long time. Didn't work. It just didn't work. We were so cocksure in our capitalist world after the collapse of the 1930s and the wisdom that Keynes clearly had given us, that we allowed ourselves to believe as a people that we didn't have to worry about it anymore. We had learned the monetary policy and the fiscal policy and all the rest to manage this, to prevent these cycles. That's why we were so stunningly surprised and unprepared in 2008 when we had another doozy of a downturn. It's part of the reason we've done so poorly in getting out of it. Why? Because we don't study it. I once looked at curricula before I went to graduate school in economics, and there used to be, years before I got there, courses called the business cycle. Students were regularly required to study, you know, the ups and the downs and to learn what other countries had done when they were afflicted by this instability. But by the time I got to graduate school, there were no such courses. And when we asked about it as graduate students, we were told, don't need them. Which meant that the generation that had to deal with the 2008 crisis had no preparation at all. hadn't studied other crises, hadn't studied what policies worked and didn't work. They were winging it. Mr. Bernanke had to go back to his doctoral dissertation research when he studied some of those things to get some clues as to what he might do. The people of the New York Fed, which were the key people making the decisions in those days, as you may remember. I'm talking about the autumn of 2008 when we came that close to this economy literally melting down. They were winging it too. They were doing the best they could. It wasn't really very good. That's why we're still in a funk 10 years later in this country. They didn't do it real well. We didn't even learn half the things we could have learned from what we did in the 1930s. We haven't been able to function to deal with this instability, a fundamental flaw of capitalism as a system. Reform didn't work. We couldn't figure it out. And what we did do didn't solve the problem. Here's another one. I could pick all night, but I won't. This is a problem called inequality. Inequality. Very simple. It means if the gap between the rich and the poor gets very large, it shouldn't stretch anyone's understanding. Or when you have a very small number of people with colossal wealth and a large number of people with next to none. Inequality is widely understood, not universally, but widely understood to be not a virtue of a system. Some people disagree about how bad it is or isn't, but a virtue, not too many. Jeffrey Bezos is currently the possessor of $129 billion. I mean, it boggles the mind. The achievement of modern capitalism is to get us levels of inequality which require us to go back to the Egypt of the pharaohs. Well, what is this? A few years ago, I think many of you may know, this French economist, Thomas Piketty, writes a book called Capital in the 21st Century, where he shows, as many of us know, that there's a regular tendency of capitalism everywhere to greater and greater inequality, which is only interrupted when the societies experiencing this inequality revolt. There's literally an explosion like we had in the 1930s when suddenly powerful mass social forces arise hating and opposed to the inequality, and then suddenly the system is frightened. It acknowledges that pressure, it responds to it one way or another, and then we can have a period, like we did in the United States, when the inequality is reduced. The 1930s, whatever else you may think of it, reduced dramatically the inequality of the United States. So much so that by the end of the Second World War, the United States was the least unequal of the advanced